But the aim of the tour is very much what Jennifer was talking about today at the start of the conference, which is to give a voice to those who are most affected by climate change as part of the ongoing debate about adaptation and the UNFCCC. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of what we do, because we work very much on the ground with some of the poorest people in Bangladesh, helping them to adapt to climate change now, because for most people in Bangladesh, climate change is a reality that's happening as we speak. So Shefali also said there's a trade-off. Humanity does face some difficult trade-offs in producing sufficient food to feed the growing population and stabilising the climate system. I think, we all know this, but globally our food system is not sustainable, does not provide adequate nutrition to everyone on the planet. At the same time, changes to our climate threaten the future of farming as we know it. And this is quite interesting because agriculture is both part of the problem and part of the solution to climate change. So, you all probably know that Bangladesh is one of the poorest countries in the world. What you probably won't know is by population, it's the largest country in the world never to have won an Olympic medal. We just had the Olympics in London, and what's fascinating about that is that Bangladesh would have never qualified for the Olympics was it not for the wild card that the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, gives. And why is that important? Well, after the Olympics there was something called a hunger summit that David Cameron, our Prime Minister, had at Downing Street. And interestingly, Bangladesh was top of that because over half the kids in Bangladesh go to bed every night without enough to eat. So whereas they didn't win an Olympic medal, they were certainly featured in that. Just a very quick, 230 of the world's most unstable rivers crisscross Bangladesh, and most of the country is less than 10 metres above sea level, which means for many people, especially the poor, are forced to live on the riverbanks and disaster-prone areas in the country. Bangladesh, I think, paints a picture of where a lot more countries in the world could be in 50 to 100 years' time. But there it's happening now. So, as I said, at any one time, a quarter of the country can be flooded, and at times up to half of it can be actually underwater. Gives you an idea of what we're up against. Though that flooding is becoming more and more frequent, that's almost certainly due to climate change, and it's giving families that we work with less and less time to recover from these climate shocks. Agriculture is a key economic sector in Bangladesh, accounts for 20% of their GDP, and 65% of the labour force, so 1 in 7 people working it, hugely at risk from this. And as I said, adaptation is absolutely the key issue in Bangladesh. We've been at the forefront of developing some quite simple but very effective technologies to help people adapt. We're a development charity. We've got 40 years worth of experience of doing this on the ground. We strongly believe in the solution, putting the solution into the hands of local people. So a lot of these technologies that I'm just about to very quickly show you have come up from local people, and we strive to work with them to lift them out of poverty. Just very quickly, rice is one of the major crops in Bangladesh, and climate change is already having a major impact here. There was a hurricane and a cyclone in 2007 called Sida that destroyed 20 million tonnes of rice in the country, enough to feed 10 million people. So that gives you an idea of some of the effects that's already been had. And the interesting statistic here is agricultural GDP in Bangladesh is projected to be 3.1% lower every year as a result of climate change. Are you going to... that's why I was going blue on me. Well, it's quite good that, so it looks like it's going to award. Okay, so one of the really simple technologies that we've helped to pioneer is floating gardens. Can I just have a quick hand show? Anybody here heard of floating gardens? Yeah? No. That's good, half of you. That's great. So this is a really simple technology. Water hyacinth is one of the dominant plants there. Use that to form a raft, and then on top of that you put manure and peat and compost, and then you can grow crops on it. So, because cropping for most people in Bangladesh who are living in riverine areas who are subjected to continual flooding, cropping in the traditional sense that we understand it is impossible. So this is a way of, these actually literally float. You have to renew them every year, but it's a way of people growing crops to feed themselves. Do I need to be? Yeah, okay. We do a lot of beef fattening, livestock management. We've produced manuals to help people with everything from nutrition to animal disease. This is another, when the floods subside, you have a lot of these sort of sandbars that are exposed. Now, initially, people couldn't grow anything on those at all. We've pioneered this sort of sandbar cropping, which is basically digging pits, and you put compost and manure and pumpkin seeds in those. And this has been hugely successful. And pumpkins are very nutritious, and they can be stored for up to a year. So you're actually helping to feed people throughout the year. Fish farming as well. We've done a lot of fish farming. We do that in ponds and open water. Again, after the monsoon, when the rice production is down, that's one of the key ways that people in Bangladesh are being fed. So the project that Nazma would have been speaking about is called Pathways from Poverty. It's entirely funded from the UK government, from our Department for International Development. We've got 6 years worth of funding up to 2015. Works in 4 districts in the north of the country along 2 major rivers. And so far it's made a difference to the lives of over 60,000 households and 300,000 people directly through some of these interventions that I've just outlined. So some strategic issues. Shivali was very keen that we painted some of these strategic issues, and they've come up in other workshops. But one of the major challenges for us is upscaling. We've developed these best practices, but how do you upscale best practice and get climate resilience with limited resources and lack of political will? On the ground in Bangladesh, we require a licence to operate. Now, that's issued by the government, and as a result of that, we have to be extremely careful of being critical of the government. That's an issue for us on a day-to-day basis about how we go forward. Also with the Bangladeshi government, a lot of Western donor governments like the UK and like the European Union have chosen for their own reasons, which you'll be aware of, to bypass the Bangladeshi government and have direct relationships with NGOs and civil society. And again, how do you work with that? Finance within Bangladesh, there's a couple of major funds, one of which is used. A lot of that money seems to be channeled through government agencies, and as an NGO we would like access to those funds, and at the moment that isn't something that's easily available to us.
Which funds? Which funds are not available?
There are 2. There's a help me out here if you want to.
No, sorry, it was just generally national.
No. There's a trust fund and there's a resilience fund. The resilience fund, as I understand it, is mainly EU and UK money.
Actually, all the donors put their money in one pouch. That's called Bangladesh Climate Change Resilience Fund. And there is another fund which is called Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, which is a government funding.
Yeah.
Basically, for the last 4 years, every year government put a little bit of money to just initiate the processes, and that is the resilience. There's the trust fund.
So the resilience fund's got about £60 million in it, and at the moment it's not a pot of money that we've been able to access, despite the fact we're doing all the work sort of
over the last 4 years. The resilience fund is like in the order of $150 million, whereas in the trust fund, our government has put some $400 million. To begin with, it's just a modest amount.
And then a big issue which we want to explore, how do we use the sort of experience we've developed in Bangladesh, which, as I said, you should look on Bangladesh as where a lot of other countries who are suffering from flooding might be in 50, 80, 100 years' time. How do we use that to convince other governments to put adaptation centre stage in the UNFCCC process? And I know Harjeet will say a little bit more about the Adaptation Committee and about the Green Climate Fund and the amount of climate finance that goes into adaptation at the moment, but as we've seen on this, it's sort of, we've got a long way to go. So, lessons learned. To help the poorest people in Bangladesh, it's about multiple interventions. It's not about fish farming and sandbar cropping, you know, doing one intervention. It's about multiple interventions, because when the next sort of flood or the next climate shock comes along, very often you can find that whatever project you've been helping with them has literally been washed away. Collaborative and cooperative working is essential. It's the only way to do it. Upscaling absolutely needs government support. It also needs the support of the corporate sector. It's not something that we've had any success with in terms in Bangladesh in being able to tap into. And We want to feel that governments are open to learning from NGOs and applying best practice. You know, we are very good at doing small-scale projects, but we need them to then take them up and to apply them much more widely. And so, and the big question for us, because we want to, you know, to achieve climate resilience, how do we get an equitable trade-off between agriculture, adaptation, and mitigation, which is one of the big issues that we need to be talking about today. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Mick. And this is not the last time for you guys to talk, but I will hold you to 10 minutes because we want to get the discussion going. So, Jean-Marc, I know Brazilians don't like to talk for just 10 minutes, but I said, I know it's hard to talk for just 10 minutes, but. So Jean-Marc is next.
Brazilian is even more difficult.
I know, that's what I said. This is a good transition to discussing agroecology, which for many of us, actually, we feel that it is the way forward to address climate resilience, looking at agroecological practices. And the fact that, and we can come to this in the debate, the fact that agroecology is being mixed up with a lot of terms like conservation agriculture and climate smart agriculture, and what does it mean, and then the narrow definition of mitigation, which is just soil carbon sequestration, which we feel like is maybe a nice kind of side effect of agroecology, but agroecology can do way much more than if we look at it as a narrow approach to just soil carbon. And so it'd be interesting to hear from Jean-Marc, who's been, as he said, 30 years into this, and to hear some of the struggles and challenges, but also you know, opportunities that he's seen in scaling up agroecology and thinking about it within this context of now adaptation. And Jean-Marc.
Okay. Yes, in 10 minutes it's impossible to try to demonstrate anything and just make some statements, and if we have time we can discuss them later and I can justify what I'm saying. And first of all, I think that everybody agrees that agriculture is one of the major factors responsible for the climate situation that we have. Depending on the organizations or groups that have analyzed it, the level of this impact, they would say that it's from 1/3 to half of the responsibility of the present situation when climate changes comes from agriculture and things around it that goes from food system, etc. And this deals, most of the criticism on this kind of agriculture is on conventional agriculture, even though traditional agriculture also has a contribution, mostly in places where this is the process of degradation, also contributes to the general situation, but on a much lesser level. On the other hand, as also a lot of people have said, agriculture will be one of the first to suffer from the climate change. It's already one of the first to suffer. The conditions are changing quickly, and in some cases with a lot of difficulties in terms of adaptation, not to speak in terms of mitigation. So what we have developed in these last 30 years, not only in Brazil but in many other places, and we learned a lot from other places, beginning with the 2 years I spent before beginning this work in Brazil. I spent 2 years working in Guinea-Bissau, and this was a major, interesting experience to discover what the very well-developed traditional agriculture could produce in terms of results, in terms of resilience, in terms of capacity of dealing with climatic scenarios that are not necessarily favorable. So then, what we succeed in these times is to create practical solutions that permit, with the use of agroecology, to eliminate the impacts, the negative impacts of the conventional systems, and also work as a carbon sink. So you are also, at the same time, you are mitigating or adapting your system to the changes. So second, it's not only the relationship between the agriculture and climate that agroecology deals with the problem of energy. So we have a positive energy relationship in the case of agroecological production. We have the relationship between the land, the soil crisis and the water crisis, a positive response to problems like depletion of phosphorus and potassium. which is less known, but it's the fact that phosphorus is already on a decline in terms of production in the last 10 years. So there's no hope unless we begin to make some mining in the moon, that we are going to have any real important reserves to deal with phosphorus in the, to keep conventional agriculture going. We got I think that the first I was said, just briefly saying before, is that agriculture has a lot of interesting experience in many places. And all the time the difficulty have been, how do you scale up these experiences? They have been, in many cases, they have been very intensive in terms of technical support. The first good example I have seen in terms of results in agriculture was in Chile. It was a very important NGO that was working there, that is called the SET. But SET had, there were 5 to 10 technicians of high-level preparation working with less than 100 farmers. So the intensity of this, when I look at that, I said the result is good, but it's impossible to use this in Brazil. We need something different, some kind of different methodology that will permit to overcome the big obstacle for agriculture. That agriculture is not easy to multiply because it's not a package that you can distribute easily. You have to find solutions for each farmer, for each specific situation, in each country, in each blend that you go. So it's not possible to make a massive campaign unless you find some kind of methodology that can deal with that. And I think we found it. We are not the only ones who found it. People from the farmers of Central America have been using this too, what they call the campesino to campesino work. We have done that. I think we have improved it a little. We learned from them. We have improved it, bringing research and extension services to this cooperation with the farmers. So I think that we found, it's a long story, I'm not going to extend on it, but I think that we are dealing now with projects that are working with thousands of farmers, 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 farmers, with a relationship technician of 1 to 1,000, in some cases 1 to 1,500, which normally the government in the northeast of Brazil, for example, the norm for the government projects of technical assistance is 1 to 60, 1 technician to 60 farmers. We are dealing in the northeast, 1 technician to 1,000 farmers. How we do that? We involve the farmers' organizations, the farmers themselves, so it's a very strong participation from the basis that permits. A lot of these things are done normally by technicians, are done now by the farmers themselves. So it's a question of organization, of mobilizing their knowledge and development of experiences and so on. And their abilities to communicate to other farmers that are normally much better than the technicians can do. In terms of strategies that we have been using, there's this is part of our debate here in this whole meeting. I think that the first fundamental thing to go to scaling up agroecology is that the farmers must ask for it. This is something that you cannot do just simply because you have a good idea from an NGO. And then, you must have let's say that this, farmers must be convinced that this is a good alternative for them. So there's a long period where you have to demonstrate that this thing works. And it took us a long period. We had, let's say that at least 10 years that we had small effects in terms of impacts. And I would say that there's a second important condition to make these things work. Either you have a financier that understands what you're doing, or you will not go very far. I think that if we had in 83, the conditions that the European Union is putting on their projects now, we would never be financed. Never. We are experimenting things that are completely new, out of the normality, so we would never be financed. So I think that this is an important issue. How do you finance innovation, differences, new perspectives? So you have a margin of risk that no donor is willing to have nowadays. So farmers' demand for this kind of thing is one point. This has increased the knowledge, not only in Brazil, not only because we had positive results with the experiences that we had, but also at the same time, both the traditional production and the conventional production are facing crisis for different reasons. The conventional because the costs are gigantic and the government cannot support them indefinitely. So it's the time of what happened that the government was sustaining the unsustainable is coming to an end. They don't have any money anymore to pay each year a general amnesty of 5 to 7 billion reais for the family farmers. Not to say for the big farmers who are asking 200 billion amnesty for their own crisis.